Hello YouTube. Bane666 here. Welcome to part 1 of my new series. Who are the real feminists? Recently, I have been hearing the "no true Scotsman" fallacy from a lot of young feminists. Just in case someone out there is unaware of the "no true Scotsman" fallacy, it goes like this.
Next fallacy, and this is one of my favorites, no true Scotsman. It's an attempt to retain an unreasoned assertion when faced with a counterexample to a universal claim. Rather than denying the counterexample or rejecting the original universal claim, this fallacy modifies the subject of the assertion to exclude the specific case or others like it by rhetoric, without referencing to any specific objective rule. An example would be Person A, no Scotsman puts sugar on his porridge. Person B, I'm Scottish and I put sugar on my porridge. Person A says, well, no true Scotsman puts sugar on his porridge. A cited example of a political application of the fallacy was asserting that no democracy starts a war, then distinguishing between mature or true democracies, in quotations, which never start wars, and emerging democracies, which may happen to start them. Some other examples are, someone were to say, all Muslims are terrorists, and then you respond, all my Muslim friends are against any and all violence. Then they would say, well, they aren't true Muslims. Another example would be, you aren't a Christian if you use birth control. Well, I use birth control, you respond, and they say, yeah, but you're really not a Christian, right? The nicest and most generous person I know is atheist. Your friend replies, well, then clearly she's not an atheist. See, this fallacy is often used by those that lack experience with particular groups, be they ethnic, political, religious, or academic.
My most recent encounter of a feminist using this fallacy was when I commented on this video.
So, today I had a short conversation with my art teacher about feminism because I saw this tweet. Yeah. And, it made me really angry. Like, really angry. Probably more angry than it should have. But it did. She told me that I just need to stand up for what I believe in. I've been pretty, just letting it go past me because it just makes life easier. And for the longest time, I've strayed away from the word feminism. And I considered myself a feminist. You could have asked me if I consider myself a feminist, and I would have said yes, but I've never, openly used the word unless I was with someone I was comfortable with, because I always thought that people would look at me negatively. And, I'm done doing that. I'm done. Ever since I watched Emma Watson's UN speech, I have just made a promise to myself that I'm done holding my tongue. So here's my I'm a Feminist Because video. Very late, but better late than never. I'm a feminist because gender-based stereotypes make me really angry. Because men should be allowed to be emotional without getting judged. Because women should be paid equally for doing the same job as a man. Because transgendered people should be able to go out into public without fear of being hurt or criticized. It's because women should not be afraid to walk home alone from work, from anywhere. They shouldn't be afraid. I'm a feminist because I don't think men should have to man up if they don't want to. Because defending yourself should be defending yourself. And hitting someone for no reason should be hitting someone for no reason. It's not good to hit people unless you're defending yourself. I'm a feminist because fathers should have the same opportunities as the mothers in custody battles. Because young girls shouldn't be afraid of having their shoulders or thighs shown in fear of getting in trouble or being sexualized or something ridiculous, considering they're only thighs and shoulders. Because victim shaming is disgusting. Because it should never happen. You don't blame someone for being hurt. If someone were hurt in 9/11, you don't blame them saying that they shouldn't have been in the building. No, That's not how it works. This is not how that works. I'm a feminist because rape isn't as bad of a thing as having drugs in your possession. Literally, a drug that chills you out is more terrible than taking away a girl's... Because rape should be seen as something bad, and it's not. I'm a feminist because I want to be allowed to sleep around if I want to, or I want to be allowed to not sleep around if I want to, and I should be allowed to... Why? It doesn't matter who sleeps with who. Why? I'm a feminist for many, many reasons, and this video was very redundant for me because I had a lot of those things on my Twitter, but feminism has a very negative connotation around it, and I can't deal with the ignorance. It's not about women's rights. It's not about men's rights. It's not about transgendered people's rights. It's about everyone's rights. If you don't want to call it feminism, you can call it humanism, but either way, they're the same thing, and there's a small minority of people who are extremists, and that is not the way we actually think. It's like everything. Religious extremists are not the real thing. Political extremists, I don't know. They're not the real thing, and that's not how we actually think. And you're taking this minority and making it into something that we all are when we're not. Stop stereotyping us. Just stop stereotyping. Stop with the gender roles. Stop with all this stuff. If a guy wants to wear a skirt, let him wear a skirt. If a girl doesn't want to wear a bra one day and you can't really tell, then who freaking cares? Who cares? Don't talk about something that you're ignorant about, please. It's not like you see me going around like, hey, farming is easy. Psh, I could do that. Easy. It's just, don't because it's stupid. No. That's an ignorant thing to say, because I don't know the first thing about farming. So don't go around saying feminism is stupid when you don't know the first thing about feminism. Go watch Emma Watson's UN speech, please. And I think I'm done, and my voice is shaking a lot because I'm emotional and I had a lot of caffeine today. Okay. Bye.
So I left a rather long comment, pointing out the mistakes in her video. And my comment also included this point. By criticizing those who criticize your movement's extremists, you are in fact shielding those extremists, when you should be speaking out about them. Effectively making you part of the problem and not part of the solution, despite your obvious good intentions. In response I got this reply. Let me point out 2 points in particular. 1. Feminists who blame men aren't feminists. The comment, feminists who blame men aren't feminists, is classic no true Scotsman fallacy. And then there was point 4. So did you upvote yourself from 5 fake accounts because this has very few views? I found this an amusing derailing tactic. I mean, why answer legitimate criticism when you can just avoid it? I have no doubt that this young woman has the best of intentions. I believe that she does want equality for both males and females. Unfortunately, I think she has not only been misled about many things, the wage gap myth for example, but she is ignorant, or maybe I should say, willfully ignorant, of the more negative aspects of feminism. A good example of this was her reply to Ian Bellamy, in which she says, "So you're worried that the equality I wish for now will be contaminated by the ideals of radical feminists? Because I promise that will never happen. I call myself a feminist for I feel my ideals fit the definition. It's just a label for my beliefs. I can stand radical feminists. I can stand radical anythings for that matter. Radical religions frustrate me to no end. But I don't totally dismiss every religious person for it, for I know not everyone is like that. I don't think it's fair to say I'm shielding radical feminists for I don't feel I am. They piss me off just as much as, I'd imagine, they do. Let me be clear here, if you are trying to ignore, or sweep under the rug, the negative aspects of feminism, while claiming that those who criticize the negative aspects are ignorant, then you are most definitely shielding those negative aspects, and you are in fact part of the problem. Instead of trying to sweep the negative aspects under the rug, you should be exposing them. Instead of labeling feminism off limits to criticism, you should be criticizing those negative aspects. You know, like this.
Much of what we hear about the plight of American women is false, and some phony claims have been repeated so often they're almost beyond the reach of critical analysis. Coming up next on The Factual Feminist, 5 feminist myths that will not die. Myth number 1. Women are half the world's population, working 2/3 of the world's working hours, receiving 10% of the world's income, and owning less than 1% of the world's property. Well, this faux fact is routinely quoted by advocacy groups, by the World Bank, Oxfam, the United Nations, but it's a fabrication. More than 15 years ago, 2 Sussex University experts on gender and development explained that the slogan was simply made up by somebody at the UN back in the 80s, and it just seems sort of right to that person. There's no evidence that it was ever accurate, and it's certainly not accurate today. In Africa, for example, Yale economist Cheryl Doss found that female land ownership ranged from 11% in Senegal to 54% in Rwanda and Burundi. Next myth.
As always, the link to the full video is below. So, what about the claim that feminism will never be contaminated by the ideas of radical feminism? Well, I would suggest that feminism has been under the influence of the radicals at least since the 70s. But don't take my word for it. Let's ask a feminist.
Camille Paglia, by title Professor of Humanities at Philadelphia's University of the Arts. By growing reputation, the scourge of American feminism. By self-assessment, America's leading female intellectual. If there's truth in that, it began to emerge in 1990 with the publication of Sexual Personae, an historical analysis of literature and art, which, among other things, hailed the male capacity for creativity, praised much of the classic Western European and American literary canon currently out of favor with many academics, and most provocatively, accepted, in fact trumpeted, the premise that sexual stereotypes spring from basic truths. She considers herself a passionate feminist, a champion of opportunity, individuality, and choice, but contends that modern feminism has fast descended into dogma, intolerance, and male bashing. Tonight, Camille Paglia.
What is Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan and the rest, what have they done that's worthwhile? What do you owe them a debt for?
Well, first of all, my feminism precedes either of them, okay? I am on the record back in the 1950s as having made these eccentric transsexual gestures at the age of 5, 6, and 7, all right? So I owe them nothing, okay? I owe them nothing. But Betty Friedan I admire very much. I'm sorry that she has made some rude remarks about me because the current feminism establishment has shunned her. She is shunned, okay? And there are many overlaps between Betty Friedan's views and mine. She is the mother of the modern movement. She founded Now, and the drift of Now away from Betty Friedan is, to me, the whole source of the problem. Gloria Steinem is a cliquish, power-mad, all right, snobbish elitist who has gotten the New York media in a stranglehold, all right, and essentially Gloria Steinem does not speak for all of feminism and now does not speak for all of women, all right, and that has to stop, all right. For Gloria Steinem to go on comparing me to a Nazi, et cetera, et cetera, I mean, it's just unbelievable. The suppression of independent voices like mine for the last 20 years, all right, is appalling. Current feminism is in a Stalinist phase, a Kremlin phase. Susan Faludi, Naomi Wolf are merely clones of the Kremlin. What I represent is again, a feminism that precedes the current movement and that many people feel more at ease with. I'm someone Gloria Steinem's record with men is rotten, okay? She has made many poor choices. I've never lived with a man, okay? I have fought with men. I fight with men constantly. I never let men take advantage of me, all right? And so because...
Let me interrupt. That may be an interesting fact of your life, that you've never lived with a man or you fought with a man.
Correct.
But I don't see where that gives you a better credential than Gloria Steinem, who I don't know her personal history that well, who may have had disappointing relationships with men, if in fact that's the case.
No. Here's the relevance. Marilyn French and Gloria Steinem, these women who, or Karen DeCrow, former head of Now, these women who were weak toward men, okay, and made bad mistakes, then glommed onto this current feminist ideology to explain to themselves and to others what happened. Well, it wasn't me, it was him. I have never been weak toward men. That's why I don't blame men. My anger toward men, my confrontationalism with men is overt. It's out there, okay? I don't need this brand of feminism to explain weakness, because I'm not weak. I don't need the approval of men. There's no man in the world that I cater to, okay? So what I'm saying is these white middle-class women love this current brand of ideology because it allows them to explain their own weaknesses to the world. You see, it wasn't me. It wasn't me at all. It was the patriarchy and all that crap. These words like patriarchy, which are meaningless, big fuzz words. All right? You know, I'm popping a lot of balloons, and that's one of them.
Although I don't agree with everything said by feminists like Christina Hoff Sommers or Camille Paglia, I do have the greatest respect for them. And would even go as far as to say that if all, or even most, feminists were like them, then I would probably even call myself a feminist. After all, I'm not against women's rights, and acknowledge women have issues too. But unfortunately, these two are a minority, and as they have both pointed out, the movement has long since been hijacked. And as you just saw in the previous clip, Camille Paglia blames this on Gloria Steinem, so maybe that should be our next stop.
Gloria Steinem, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Does the feminist cause feel as urgent to you today as it did when you rose to international prominence in the late 60s, early 70s?
More. Because when we began, we were talking more about personal injustices, about pay, about domestic violence, about things that were within our ken. And now we've come to understand through length of work and also through international studies that the single most important factor in whether a country is violent within itself or willing to use military violence against other countries is violence against females, because that normalizes, it's the earliest, it's the biggest, it's not that female life is worth more than male life, it's not, but that subject-object, conquered-conqueror kind of paradigm in varying degrees normalizes it everywhere else. And that now has been proved in depth. So in a way, we've gone deeper now and seen how much more important it is.
So are you saying that the priorities of the women's movement, if I can loosely call it that, have fundamentally changed away from the sort of nuts and bolts of equal pay for equal work and control of fertility to something that is perhaps less tangible?
No, because what I'm saying is that the root of democracy outside the home is democracy inside the home. So it's even more important. The root of violence elsewhere is the normalization of violence in an intimate way in the home.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but when you put it like that, it just makes me wonder whether most women these days in Western developed societies would feel the same way that you do. Because when you talk about the importance of democracy in the home, wouldn't most women in the developed world today feel that they have democracy in their own home?
Of course not. Are you kidding? Do men raise children as much as women?
But do women feel oppressed today in the way that they did in the late 60s and 70s in Western society?
Yes, more so, because now, for instance, when we started, we didn't even have a word for domestic violence. It was just called life. People would constantly say, why didn't she leave? What did she do? Now we understand that domestic violence is original violence. And for instance, in my country, there are, if you count up all the people who were killed in 9/11, plus Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan, and you count up all the women who were murdered by their husbands or boyfriends in the same amount of time, more women were murdered by their husbands and boyfriends than were killed in those three events.
You'll note that when she talks about domestic violence, she talks only of the male being the victimizer and the female being the victim. And this basically is her view of the world. Men are always the victimizing oppressor class, and women are always the victimized oppressed. Men are always the actors, and women, lacking proper agency, are always acted upon. And for the record, more people died in September 11th, Afghanistan, and Iraq, than women in the U.S. who died from domestic abuse for the same period. The number of people killed by terrorists in the United States on September 11, 2001 was 2,977. The number of troops killed in Afghanistan totaled 2,125 and 4,475 in Iraq, according to the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. That would bring the total for the attack and the two wars to 9,577 deaths. From 2001 through 2005, 5,861 women were killed by an intimate partner, according to the Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Statistics. Of course, these numbers don't include male veterans who have committed suicide once they have returned home. Nor does it take into account that domestic violence against males could be a factor in the incredibly high male suicide rate. But let's look at another interview from Gloria.
How do you, Gloria Steinem, define feminism?
I'll go with the dictionary. It just means the belief in the full social, economic, political equality of males and females. I would add acting on it as well as believing it. But other than that, I'd go with the dictionary.
Sound familiar?
Let's talk about where things stand for women here in the U.S. Today, there are almost as many women as men in the workforce, 47%. But still, we're only earning 80 cents for every dollar that men earn. Back in 1979, it was 62 cents, but it still feels like we should be further along. Why do you think we still have this disparity?
Well, we have this disparity because women are the cheap labor force on which many things run. The pink-collar ghetto of mostly female jobs are the jobs that we can't outsource. They're the food service and healthcare and, office work. And, they're poorly paid because they are mostly female ghettos. So quantity is not quality. Just because we have now almost 50% of paid work doesn't mean that it's equal. And the other problem is that, of course, we have two jobs for the most part. I mean, poor women always had two jobs, one at home and one outside the home, and now most women do.
Sound familiar?
Still, there's some research that shows that women don't necessarily step into leadership roles with ease. There is a big psychological, big emotional transition just to get their heads around, I guess, being in that role. Like a new study shows that women's share of corporate jobs is 53% at the entry level to 14% at the executive committee level. Do you think women are mentally and psychologically prepared to be that top person?
I hope not. No, because it's not about integrating a not-so-good system. It's about transforming and making it better. If women have to acquire all the characteristics of the corporate world, it may not be worth it. So, and I think women are saying that. So it's actually probably more useful to think of women as an immigrant group. We're like the biggest immigrant group. And like other immigrant groups, we probably have a hard time making it up through other people's hierarchies. Women are starting their own businesses because, both because it's hard to get up through somebody else's hierarchy and because they don't like what they find there.
Sound familiar?
I want you to elaborate on a quote that I've heard you say. The overall problem is that women are still treated as if they were a particular subject rather than something that transforms every subject.
Yeah, I mean, women are half the human race. And not only that, but if you grow up in a home in which it's okay by birth, for one group to eat and the other to cook, for one to get an education and the other not, for one to get beaten up or one to get ordered around and the other give the orders and do you can directly predict the amount of democracy in a society by the amount of democracy in the home. You can directly predict the amount of violence in public life or foreign policy by the amount of violence in homes. The Irish peace women, for instance, who won the Nobel Prize for beginning the end of centuries of violence in Ireland, did it by saying, a Catholic and a Protestant woman saying, we've had violence in the home too long. We know that that's the source of violence in the street and no more. The good news about being human is we're adjustable. The bad news is that we're adjustable. So that, there's just nothing, absolutely nothing, that isn't affected by the female half of the human race as well as the male half.
We've heard this all before, right? Men pay women less because they are women. Men beat women because they are women. Males always playing the role of victimizer, females always playing the role of victim. We have heard it 1,000 times before, from 1,000 feminists screaming, "Smash the patriarchy." Speaking of patriarchy,
You just described quite a shift. Speaking of shifts, let's talk a little bit about reproductive rights. It feels like in the United States, there's almost a targeted state-by-state movement to limit access to family planning. For example, in Indiana, there is a law that bans access to Planned Parenthood for Medicaid recipients. That affects birth control, testing for sexually transmitted diseases, screening for cervical cancer, abortion. Is this just politics as usual?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's patriarchal politics as usual, because the very definition of patriarchy is controlling reproduction. And women's bodies are the means of reproduction. So every patriarchy in different ways tries to control how many workers, how many soldiers, which races or classes should increase more than others. So classically, they restrict the women of the superior group, so-called, and exploit the bodies of the inferior group, in order to produce cheap labor, in order to maintain class or maintain clear racial differences. By declaring reproductive freedom as a fundamental right, we are seizing control of the means of reproduction. It even sounds radical. It is radical.
Okay, I'm now going to say something that many people will find controversial, but I implore you to listen to and understand my reasoning before leaving angry comments, claiming that I'm ignorant on the topic of feminism. Here I go. There are only two types of feminism. For the sake of argument, I will refer to them as patriarchy theory positive feminism and patriarchy theory negative feminism. Now, I'm not suggesting that there aren't many differing views, disagreement, or debate within each group. Of course there are. But each group can be defined by its belief in the patriarchy, or its non-belief in the patriarchy. And by patriarchy, I'm referring to the feminist definition of patriarchy.
Radical feminism is a platform for gender equality, which includes, among other things, the belief that most gender is performed. As a radical feminist, I believe that gender roles are artificially created, that most dimorphism is affected rather than mandated by nature, and that the divide has been pushed beyond all reason to the express benefit of men. This is what we call the patriarchy. One unfortunate aspect of this socialization is that society, through various messages, including but not limited to role modeling from peers and media, teaches young men that they are entitled to the hearts and minds of women, including, but again, not limited to domestic and sexual servitude. Women, no more fond of subjugation and servitude than men, become unfortunately prone to self-loathing, and more fortunately prone to rebellion. In the process of shaking ourselves loose the shackles of gendered expectations, different schools of feminism have emerged. Varying degrees of oppression are recognized, and socialized roles and appearances are sorted differently into categories of oppressive and benign. Radical feminism, as the name suggests, subscribes to the most severe criteria.
I don't doubt that there are many differing views within patriarchy theory positive feminism, but the one thing that unites them is their common belief in patriarchy theory. That society benefits men and disadvantages women. That males systematically oppress, and that females are systematically oppressed. Once again, let me stress, I'm not suggesting that all patriarchy theory positive feminists agree on all things, just that the foundation of their belief system is in common. A good analogy is Christianity. Not all Christians agree on all things. Some are pro-choice, and some are anti-abortion. Some believe in an actual devil, and some believe in a metaphorical devil. Some believe in evolution, and some believe in creationism. The list goes on. But the one thing they all have in common is their common belief, their foundational belief, in Christ. This is also a good analogy, as some groups of Christians will declare that other groups of Christians are not true Christians, for one reason or another. But back to feminism.
Now, a commenter named Rendar Smith writes in response to the Rule of Thumb video, Christina, I love what you do, but you have got to drop the feminist label. The movement has failed. It's filling society with anti-male bigotry. Well, this is probably one of the most common criticisms that I get. Why call myself a feminist? Well, I became a feminist in high school back in the last millennium. I grew up with a style of feminism that has nothing to do with what passes for feminism today. It wasn't about denigrating men or fixating on victimhood. It was about being a free, responsible, self-determining being. And in my writings, I call that style of feminism equity feminism, or more recently, freedom feminism. Freedom feminism stands for the moral, social, and legal equality of the sexes. And it's a great American success story. I still believe the world needs a healthy, evidence-based women's movement. And I think the major battles for equality and of opportunity in the United States, they have been fought, they have been won.
French and Gloria Steinem, these women who, or Karen DeCrow, former head of NOW, these women who were weak toward men, okay, and made bad mistakes, then glommed onto this current feminist ideology to explain to themselves and to others why, what happened. Well, it wasn't me, it was him. I have never been weak toward men. That's why I don't blame men. My anger toward men, my confrontationalism with men is overt. It's out there, okay? I don't need this brand of feminism to explain weakness, because I'm not weak. I don't need the approval of men. There's no man in the world that I cater to, okay? So what I'm saying is these white middle-class women love this current brand of ideology because it allows them to explain their own weaknesses to the world. You see, it wasn't me. It wasn't me at all. It was the patriarchy and all that crap. These words like patriarchy, which are meaningless, big fuzz words. Okay? You know, I'm popping a lot of balloons.
Well aware that in the minds of many, feminism connotes an irrational, male-blaming, paranoid worldview. And I admit that I'm mortified by all the fuss about trigger warnings and microaggressions and checking your privilege. I mean, the spectacle of those panicked Wellesley women demanding that a statue of a guy be removed from campus because it reinforced the rape culture.
That a controversial statue of that man walking, sleepwalking I should say, in his underwear is triggering apprehension, fear, and even thoughts of sexual assault.
I mean, to my mind, that is not feminism. That's just madness. Well, but I'm also aware that men in the United States, as much as women, face problems. I think it's hard to say who's better off. It's a complicated mix of burdens and benefits. So, to answer the question, I fully understand that many may wonder why I don't clearly distance myself from the extremists who have run off with feminism. Why not commit myself to a more inclusive cause, call it peopleism or equalism? Well, I'm tempted. But you know, I'm just not ready to give it up. I think the movement, it has a noble history, and it has to be reformed from within. And one last thing. If it bothers you that I call myself a feminist, just remember this. It bothers the gender warriors at Jezebel even more.
The equity feminists, as Christina Hoff Sommers calls them, or egalitarian feminists, or rational feminists, or patriarchy-negative feminists, as I referred to them before, or whatever you want to call them, don't need to play the victim card. They are not anti-male, and acknowledge that males have issues, without choosing the bullshit argument of patriarchy backfiring. They don't need to demonize males or masculinity. They are more interested in facts and evidence than ideology. And they are willing to criticize the negative aspects of feminism, as opposed to sweeping it under the rug. I see nothing wrong with this brand of feminism. It's a healthy form of feminism. Unfortunately, Christina Hoff Sommers and Camille Paglia are the only prominent feminists I know of that fit this category. If you know of any more, please link below. But what are the characteristics of patriarchy-positive feminism? Well, it can be summed up in a couple of simple sentences. Men are the problem, and feminism is the solution. It seems that this is a universal axiom, which in their eyes is never ever wrong. Even when a female commits an horrendous act towards a male, they will somehow, some way, still find a way to blame the male. He must have done something to deserve it. Or she was conditioned by a patriarchal society to act in masculine ways, or some utter bullshit like that. Males are always seen as aggressive, oppressive, violent, sex-obsessed, less intelligent, and barbaric. While females, by contrast, are pure, natural, harmonious, loving, caring, the goddess herself incarnate. And if for some reason, a woman fails at something, then somehow, it must be the fault of those evil barbaric men. With this mentality, domestic violence isn't something done by one partner to another, or both partners take part in. No, it takes on the gender identity of something men exclusively do to women. And if by chance, a woman does it to a man, well, as violence is something men do, then she could only ever be doing it in self-defense. With this mentality, sexual assault isn't something done by one person to another. No, it takes on the gender identity of something men exclusively do to women. And if they ever do acknowledge that men can be victims of sexual assault as well, it's nearly always male-on-male rape, and they will claim that it only happened as the rapist saw the victim as a female stand-in. Yes, it seems that even when the victim is a male, somehow, women are still the victims. And of course, they never mention female-on-female sexual assault, as they would prefer to ignore female victims than to acknowledge female perpetrators. They play a rigged game of ideology, where they constantly shift the goalposts and make up the rules as they go along. Their brand of feminist ideology isn't about equality, or fairness, or facts. It actively promotes only negative gender stereotypes towards males, and only positive gender stereotypes towards females. It is simply, at its very core, the hatred of men. Now at this point, no doubt, there is at least one or two of you who are saying something like, "But Bane, isn't that just the extremists, the radical feminists?"
There's been a constant war against women because men are so afraid of women having any type of control because they love their destructiveness. They absolutely love their violence. A lot of men, a lot of them love violence.
The simple answer to the question is no. It's not just the extremists, it's all forms of feminism that use patriarchy theory. That doesn't mean that they are all as hate-filled as the radical feminists. But their belief system is still built on the axiom of, men are the problem, feminism is the solution.
It's about freedom. I want men to take up this mantle, so that their daughters, sisters, and mothers can be free from prejudice, but also so that their sons have permission to be vulnerable and human too. Reclaim those parts of themselves they abandoned, and in doing so, be a more true and complete version of themselves.
Although it is evident that Emma Watson's version of feminism isn't hate-filled like that of the Radfems, it still uses their "men are the problem, feminism is the solution" ideology. And in reality, is nothing but a heavily watered-down version of the radical feminist poison Kool-Aid. I have no doubt that feminists like the one I showed at the beginning have the best of intentions.
I'm a feminist because rape isn't as bad of a thing as having drugs in your possession. Literally, a drug that chills you out is more terrible than taking away a girl's... Because rape should be seen as something bad, and it's not.
But unfortunately, instead of being more concerned with facts over ideology, and actually fighting for equality like the feminism of Paglia and Hoff-Sommers, feminists like this one have been misled with a watered-down poisoned ideology. Instead of actually fighting for equality, they only pay lip service to it, while unknowingly act as a shield to the more radical hate-filled elements.
Feminism has a very negative connotation around it, and I can't deal with the ignorance. It's not about women's rights. It's not about men's rights. It's not about transgendered people's rights. It's about everyone's rights. If you don't want to call it feminism, you can call it humanism, but either way, they're the same thing, and there's a small minority of people who are extremists, and that is not the way we actually think. It's like everything. Religious extremists are not the real thing. political extremists, I don't know. They're not the real thing, and that's not how we actually think. And you're taking this minority and making it into something that we all are when we're not.
I don't really get why people always feel the need to distance themselves from radical feminism every time they talk about feminism. And I don't mean that I'm dissing people for not being radical feminists. I just wonder, why do they need to do it every time? They're like, okay, so then I get my feminism, but I'm not a radical feminist. Not those radical feminists. Who are these radical feminists? Because so far I have heard everyone say they're not them, and very few people say they are them. It gets to the point where I read an entire article talking about feminism in a negative light. The article was meant to be portraying feminism negatively, but it kept talking about radical feminists like they were boogie monsters about to come out of your wardrobe and eat you. To the point where they used the phrase so often that the writer shortened radical feminists down to rad femmes for the entire article, which, rad femmes, I kind of love it. Like, it doesn't know if it's a really cool 90s compliment or like a Tumblr aesthetic. Rad femme.
Let me be blunt. Radical feminism is the proverbial turd in the punch bowl that most feminists don't want to acknowledge. They'll try to avoid discussing it. They'll call you ignorant because you don't know what true feminism is, and they'll try to, no true Scotsman, it away. And their reason for this is simple. It's because they are drinking out of the shallow end of the same punch bowl.
Women in the United States and in Western Europe are the freest and most liberated in human history. In many ways, they are not merely doing as well as men, they are doing better. Women's emancipation is one of the glories of Western civilization and one of the great chapters in the history of freedom. So why then are those in the women's movement, such as the leaders and members of activist groups like the National Organization for Women, the professors in women's studies departments at our colleges, and many women in the media, why are they still so dissatisfied? These feminists hardly acknowledge women's progress. Yes, they concede that some advances have been made, but the fact that most women reject their activist brand of feminism and think of themselves as free is, for this crowd, proof of just how entrenched patriarchy and inequality truly are. Women are so oppressed, they don't even know it. Year after year, these activists make claims about women in violence, women in depression, women in eating disorders, women in workplace injustice, to support their views. Over the years, I have looked carefully at many of these claims, and what I have found is that much of the supporting evidence, mostly victim statistics, is misleading and often flat out wrong. Consider the issue of the so-called gender wage gap. How many times have you heard that for the same work, women receive 77 cents for every dollar a man earns? This charge is constantly repeated by feminist activists and their supporters. Yet it is so deeply misleading as to border on outright falsehood. 23-cent gender pay gap is simply the difference between the average earnings of all men and women working full-time. It does not take account for differences in occupations, positions, education, job tenure, or hours worked per week. Now, wage gap activists and groups like the American Association of University Women or the National Women's Law Center, they say, no, even when you control for these factors, women still earn less. Well, it always turns out that they have omitted one or two crucial data points. Take the case of doctors. On the surface, it looks like female physicians are clearly victims of wage discrimination. They appear to earn less for the same work. But dig a little deeper beneath the surface, and you find that women are far more likely than men to enter lower-paying specialties like pediatrics or family medicine than higher-paying cardiology or anesthesiology. They are also more likely to work part-time. And even women who work full-time put in about 7% fewer hours than men. Women physicians are also far more likely to take long leaves of absence, usually to start a family. Now, there are exceptions, but most workplace pay gaps narrow to the point of vanishing when one accounts for all of these relevant factors. Now, how do the women's advocacy groups react to this? They insist that women's choices are not truly free. Women who decide, say, to stay home with children or to work fewer hours or to become pediatricians rather than heart surgeons are held back by invisible barriers or internalized oppression. According to the National Organization for Women, powerful sexist stereotypes steer women and men toward different educational training and career paths and family roles. But is it really social conditioning that explains women's vocational preferences and their special attachment to children? Perhaps in the pursuit of happiness, men and women take somewhat different paths. And isn't it more than a little patronizing to suggest that most American women are not free, they're not self-determining human beings? And here is common sense proof that the male-female wage gap is untrue. If it were really true that an employer could get away with paying Jill less than Jack for the exact same work, wouldn't most employers fire as many of their male employees as possible and replace them with females and enjoy a huge market advantage? As a regular campus lecturer, I routinely encounter students who have fully accepted the feminist propaganda. American college women are arguably the most fortunate, liberated beings on the planet, yet in their feminist theory classes, they're likely to learn that they are put upon and tyrannized by men. And the more elite the school, the more advanced the degree, the more likely they are to take such feminist propaganda seriously. But this doesn't have to continue. The time has come for young women to take back feminism, reform it, correct its excesses, repudiate the victim propaganda, get rid of the women are from Venus, men are from hell storylines, and begin the arduous task of correcting almost 3 decades of feminist misinformation. And women who are plagued by workplace injustice or sexual violence will be best helped by truth and solid research, not by hysteria and hype. And as a final piece of personal advice for young women, appreciate and make good use of the unprecedented freedom that you have. I'm Christina Hoff Sommers of the American Enterprise Institute for Prager University.
Welcome back to our pre-debate interviews for tonight's mock debate. Be it resolved, men are obsolete. We've got Camille Paglia. She's an iconic writer of a number of best-selling books. We all know them well. An academic, and I love this, Camille. You are a columnist with the Hollywood Reporter.
Well, I'm not a columnist, but I do write for them.
Yeah,
yes, I run the gamut. Well, see, I began very interested in popular culture at a time when being interested in Hollywood or rock and roll was considered unserious. And there's absolutely no doubt I lost credibility in grad school at Yale because of my passion for movies. European art films had barely become known at that point.
Well, let's talk about tonight's debate, and I want you to expand on one of your many quotable quotes on this topic, and it's that, quote, feminism was wrong to pretend that women could have it all. It's not a male society, but Mother Nature who lays the heaviest burden on women. Unpack that for us.
Well, this is the theme of my first book, Sexual Personae, which is that I discovered through a long process of search as a dissident personality who did not identify at all with my gender role as a child. And blame society completely for everything. Okay? But through the course of study and research, I began to understand that it's actually Mother Nature who is at this point in history women's greatest obstacle, because women still bear the burden of pregnancy and of nursing. And so I think that women's lives are those who want to have children, their lives are categorically different than those of men who can take on fatherhood as almost a kind of a social duty. It's a social responsibility. responsibility. These are social acts that a father does. But a woman who is pregnant is involved, okay, with the fetus in a way that is absolutely primal, that is instinctual. There are biological forces that take her over. And oh my Lord, if you raise this issue, okay, the feminists today, 99% of them, squawk and scream and say that this is a conservative reactionary position. No, this is a realistic position, okay? And feminists are in a state of delusion, okay? And the feminist movement is losing ground the longer it denies this overwhelming fact of nature. Now, I believe, as the Marquis de Sade did, as Oscar Wilde and Baudelaire and Gautier did, my masters, that it is our obligation as human beings to defy nature if necessary. Okay? But one cannot deny nature's power and nature's existence. Universities around the world are now teaching this rot to undergraduates and to graduate students, okay, that gender is nothing but a fiction, an arbitrary invention. Yes, they would use the word construction, imposed, right, by oppressive institutions on people. And this is like absolute madness. Men will not know who they are. Women won't know who they are. Okay? I mean, and I support everything transgender, and I call my feminism drag queen feminism. So in no way am I coming from the right wing side. Okay? But what I'm saying is, it's about time for feminist discourse to reappropriate biology. Biology must be, okay, a required course in every women's studies or gender studies program. The absence of biology, okay, has produced propagandists, okay, who have never even thought about science. So they're incompetents, okay. So that's why we have such confusion, and it's also why most people don't care about the women's movement, because they can see how divorced it is from reality.
Mm-hmm. Give us a bit of a flavor for your talk tonight. You're an admirer of a lot of what men have built culturally. You think that this is key to how we need to understand civilization, not just in the past, not just today, but in the future.
Yes, right. Well, one of my most inflammatory statements in Sexual Personae was, if civilization had been left in female hands, we would still be living in grass huts. And no one thought through what I was saying. I was saying, in effect, that all of the greatest works of life-defying, risk-taking enterprises, all of these things, okay, have been the product of men. Why Sexual Personae presented the thesis that men have been driven to create because of their more ambiguous sense of identity. Women know who they are from the moment their menstruation begins at puberty. They don't have to prove who they are, right? But men always have to prove it again and again and again with every erection, with every sex act. They have to prove it again and again and again. So I'm saying that men are, heterosexual men in particular, okay, wandering the world, okay, finally finding the woman of their dreams, and it's just a vision of their mother, okay, and the sex act is going back to the womb, okay. There's a terrifying aspect, okay, to sex. There are all kinds of dark, imaginative forces going on beneath the surface that feminism kind of ignores. So yes, I have learned enormously from men. But one of my other sentences from that book is, there is no female Mozart because there is no female Jack the Ripper. Okay,
Well, explain that.
I'm saying that women cluster at the median point of the intelligent rank. Okay, they do not produce great geniuses, neither do they produce morons and criminals and mass murderers. Right? It is overwhelmingly obvious. Okay, that the people who are picking up guns and massacring children and so on, that these are distorted fantasies emerging from the male mind. But it's exactly analogous, okay, to art making, or to having this vision of going into outer space. Okay? I mean, every act of genius, okay, has its corollary, its parallel in an act of madness. So again, I think that feminism has been so concerned to deny sexual differences that it's painted itself into a corner. In the feminist movement is right now moribund. And again, why is it moribund? It's because ordinary people understand, okay, that these women have nothing to say to their own passions, their own concerns, their own desires, all right? And so it's time to bring feminism back to the real world, re-examine biology again, and be fair to men, okay? Enough of this, okay? The negativity toward men,
let's talk about that negativity a bit. I mean, male performance outside of the bedroom, but in the workplace, in our school system, I mean, something seems to be happening. You know, would you agree that maleness today ain't what it used to, ain't what it used to be? That there's maybe a confusion amongst men as to what their role in society is that the popular culture has created.
Well, I think educated men are definitely in a quandary. They want to be polite to women. They want to be courteous to women. I think that they are careful not to tell women exactly what the contents of their own sexual imaginations are, what they are, and so on. But I think I am always listening to sports radio, okay, in the United States. There are a lot of sports radio stations, and there I hear the voices of real men, okay? I hear the voices of working class men, of truckers, of guys from construction projects, and so on and so forth. So I think that a lot of the laments, okay, about the condition of men is coming from white upper middle class women, okay, about white upper middle class men, okay? And it's about time that I think that feminist theorists start to become aware of despite their putative leftism, they must start to be aware of their own class biases.
Interesting. Let me end by asking you a question I've asked some of the other presenters tonight. Is there a man icon, it could be fictional or real, a director or writer, who you think really gets women right in their portrayal? Is there somebody out there that has their finger on the pulse of what?
Well, I mean, my favorite directors is, of course, Alfred Hitchcock. I wrote a book on the birds for the British Film Institute, and he has been notoriously pilloried as a misogynist, okay, by feminists, okay? Whereas I think he's got it right, okay? From my perspective, as a marginalized and always complaining lesbian, okay? I'm always complaining. I really think that Hitchcock had an eye, okay, for beautiful women, sexy women's relationship, okay, to their bodies, to costume, okay, to self-presentation, okay. There was the kind of glamorous sexual woman that feminism has never taken seriously, has always attacked as being merely a pawn of male fantasy, okay. And that's not what I say at all. Okay? I am extremely interested in very beautiful, glamorous women.
And what, you see power there?
And so, so I'm a great fan in the United States of the Bravo series, okay, Real Housewives, which is, the executive producer is a gay man, okay, Andy Cohen, who grew up watching Susan Lucci on All My Children. He's a great fan of soap opera, and soap opera was part of the lineage, okay, coming from Hollywood. The women's pictures, Lana Turner, the suffering, glamorous women, et cetera, et cetera. I have said that the Real Housewives series, a reality show, is an anthropological study, okay, of the actual way beautiful, sexy women interrelate with each other. It's absolutely a universal. Feminism cannot take it in. Gloria Steinem said she wanted to pick it, okay, the Real Housewives of New Jersey show. That shows you the gap between her and me, okay, because I watch these shows. I can watch them 4 or 5 times, okay, the same episode, and so on, right? And wherever I go in the world, I see beautiful women acting toward each other in exactly the same way, okay? It's women, okay, who appreciate how a woman dresses. Women dress for other women. They don't dress for men. What do men know? Men know nothing, okay? Men just say, oh, you look nice, okay? What are they? Women, okay, oh, you look beautiful, okay? The women immediately, the women assess and so on. There's this tremendous competition going on, okay, on the sexual level among high-profile women that feminism has been afraid to acknowledge, because they say, oh, then we admit women are bitches, then women are catty, women are this, women are that. But that's just too bad, okay? Yes, I do, okay, worship, okay, the beautiful, glamorous woman. Time, okay, conquers all, okay? Beauty fades. Beauty is transient. That is why we value it. This is what the ancient Greeks knew about beautiful boys, okay, and beautiful, perfect athletic bodies, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, feminism's failure to acknowledge that beauty is a value in itself, and that even if a woman manages to achieve it for a particular moment, okay, she has contributed something to culture, okay? And that's and thank heavens for photography and for movies that preserve forever the beauty of certain women, okay, at their absolute peak, whether it's Catherine Deneuve or Elizabeth Taylor, or the great stars of the 1930s, Jean Harlow, whether Rita Hayworth, at her peak, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So my entire frame of reference is closer to that of the mass audience that goes to movies, okay, than it is to that of feminist theorists.
Okay. Well, Camille, you've given us a terrific taste of what we're going to hear tonight.
Oh, well, I must
stage.
I have to be polite tonight.
Well,
not
too polite.
This is a Canadian audience, okay, and I must rein myself in.
But
okay?
don't do what Canadians do, which is start violently agreeing with each other. Okay, I'm counting on you